Hello, everybody. My name is Ray. Welcome to the Evangelical Dark Web. We got a special presentation for you tonight, and that is a special guest, Stephen Wolfe, joining us live. And we're going to ask him some tough questions, I guess. And this is going to be a little bit more of a journalistic experience from my end. Anthony has read The Case for Christian Nationalism, and he did the review on it for Evangelical Dark Web. So he's going to be covering more of the book angle, and then we're also going to be talking about how it relates to modern politics as well. So don't forget, if since this is live, we will be interacting with chat. But as far as questions go, probably going to reserve the most of it for super chats unless we have time, because we got some questions prepared, which we don't always have questions prepared, but for this case we do. So how are you doing tonight, Stephen?
Good. I think I just fixed my audio. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes,
there you
it
go.
is.
Yeah, I had it wrong. Yeah, I'm doing great.
So obviously you're no stranger to the controversy, and let's just start off hot. Maybe work our way back in terms, but you're no stranger to controversy. And recently Christian Post, which is occasionally a conservative Christian outlet, is occasionally a liberal Christian outlet, but is always kind of a Jewish controlled Christian outlet, because they have like an Israel piece like once a week. But anyway, they wrote an article about you, uh, going after you for, daring to ask who is Emmett Till, because I guess they assume that was not intellectual curiosity. If you don't know who Emmett Till is, then you must be some sort of bad person for not, being super informed on the most important death in American history. I don't know, but I don't quite know what their indignation is, but I took it as you're just kind of, it's okay to question historical narratives. Is that, so I'll bite. Who is Emmett Till? Have you figured that out yet after asking?
Yeah, it's one of those funny things where, like, would someone, if they wanted to know who someone is, actually go to Twitter to ask who someone is? And so of course I know who he was and the events surrounded. And I did before I asked the question. It's really just when things happen, well, like with events and like in history, you have the actual facts of what happened on the ground, and then you have the narrative, or kind of how it fits into a sort of broad narrative. And kind of the question is, like, who is someone, is kind of asking, well, like, what's the narrative that this person has become, or that event has become. So you think of like the French Revolution, like, seems like every decade there's a new interpretation of it, even over 200 years later, because of the way it's impacted history, the narrative, how we understand ourselves, and liberalism and nationalism, and all these questions. So the same thing with like Emmett Till. It's a tragic event that occurred, but it's also something where we have to now know him almost intimately and reflect upon it, the event, every single year, and then relitigate whether or not we still live in such a society, which, if we say we're not, then we're racist. And so kind of calling into question, or kind of separating the narrative of the event versus the event itself, I think is a way to uh, kind of think clearly about what sort of propaganda is being forced upon us. So you can know about an event and also kind of question whether that the narrative of that event is something we need to kind of relitigate or use as a like a self-flagellating device every single year. So that's kind of the point. Doesn't really come across in 5 words, but of course they thought it meant that I was asking people who this person was. But
But even if you
anyway,
were, it's
so
like,
yeah.
it should have been read as, hey, who is he? Because there's so much of a narrative fix. I've heard like conflicting things about. I mean, I have not researched the whole Emmett Till thing. I've heard conflicting accounts on what the actual facts are, but my understanding is it was a case of vigilantism going too far, and obviously, you
Oh,
know,
white woman tears is the idea of a white woman making a false sexual assault claim.
I
And
mean, yeah,
Yeah.
I think the reality is probably that he might have touched her hand, that he did some sort of, like, I think, because I think Bill O'Reilly got into a controversy 10 years ago writing the Emmett Till thing in his Killing Kennedy book, and that was the narrative that he laid down, was that he touched her hand and was bragging to the other like black youths that he could like talk to white women in a way that they couldn't because he's from Chicago.
But I
I
mean,
think
the thing is though, is like even if let's say that like it's that everything was as bad as everyone says it was for that event. That I mean, the question still becomes like, what relevance is that for the broader narrative of American history or even our our present moment now? And why would we focus upon one specific event when you can think of, I mean, you could potentially think of tens of thousands of events where the situation is reversed, where it's someone, a black person, killing or raping white people. And so, why don't we know any of those cases? Like, why don't we know the cases where there have been children that have been killed by black? So that that's not to say like let's now every single year think about all the white children killed by blacks. It's just a matter of why, like, what purpose does it serve for the regime to focus on one specific event that occurred decades ago, a long time ago, that actually is not reflective of the society we're in. And
Yeah, if
what's I mean,
anything, we might have too little vigilantism in our society. We don't have people willing to take initiative, in a righteous justice. I mean, you do see, that's why when you see viral videos like those shopkeepers in, I believe those San Francisco, beating the one dude who was trying to steal cigarettes in a trash can, like, you don't see that in our society now, and you're seeing a rise in crime because you're not really seeing an initiative. And then that was kind of like, let's go vigilante and round up a posse for something very minute.
I mean,
I mean, there might be like you could. I think you can, in cases where there isn't civil authority present. I think you can actually
Or they're
you
refusing to do their
you can
job.
order apart from authority, like just to exact justice. But I mean, vigilantism isn't the great thing, especially when there is civil authority. But I do think, yeah, I mean, just as a kind of a broader, not vigilantism, but like the idea that there's a sort of populace that is willing to stand up for against violent or dangerous disorder. So I mean, one of the problems is that this is, if you stand up for yourself or for others, you'll go to jail. I mean,
Yeah,
there
like the
was that
dude
the
on the
guy,
subway did.
yeah, subway example, subway, and you can think of other examples as well. And so it's just, I mean, it's a narco tyranny. Basically, the authorities do not punish uh, violent or kind of like vagrancy and other things. But if you stand up to it, you get arrested. I mean, on
Yeah.
Twitter recently, there was someone like right in the open, her bike was being stolen by a guy, and
no, this
people are
was a
watching.
city. No, it was a city bike
Yeah, the
that
city
she
bike.
would pay for, like a rideshare program.
Oh no, I'm talking about something else.
Oh, well, see,
There's
it
a.
happened.
I mean,
Happens all the time, apparently.
it happened. Of course, the stealing the bikes and all that, but but yeah, like broad, like bright. It's like public. It's personal bike. Someone's stealing it. People are walking by. But would you? Is it worth going to jail for potentially years, for you to help this woman recover her bike from this guy? Like, you have to now, whereas a few
It,
years ago, 10, 20, 30 years ago and all the way back, of course you'd stand up to the guy, get the bike back, the cops and the DA and everyone would be on your side. But nowadays, because a narco tyranny, that's the nature of a narco
you
tyranny, is
know,
to allow disorder, and then when you, by your own authority, individual assertion, like assertiveness, say no, you're the one who's punished, you're the one who goes to jail. That's the same with like people like Kyle
I mean,
Rittenhouse. That happened with that NCO, that guy in South Carolina. I mean, there's several examples of this.
it's funny because when you say that, like, I think of like the Seinfeld finale, which I guess was panned at the time, but if you watch it now, I think it ages much better than like most sitcom finales do, because it was about the opposite of that happening, where they saw someone getting mugged and they videotaped him and laughed at him while he was getting mugged, and then were punished for that because of, good Samaritan law or whatever. And that
Oh.
was the Seinfeld finale. But we are living to see that very same finale play out, except there's no punishment or even societal deterrence. You get a viral video on World Star and, copyright, and you can sell it to media organizations and make money for having these types of films. There's no incentive, there's a monetary incentive to just stay back and get it all on video and let people suffer in broad daylight. And that's what you see nowadays.
Yeah, I'm not aware of that, but I can imagine. Yeah, there's some business in recording, but I mean, in a way, that's the best you could do. I mean, again, like, is it worth going to jail to recover that woman's bike? I mean, it's probably not.
No, you want to be on
But the
World
best
Star.
you could do is record it and post on social media and complain about the disorder. I mean, it's pathetic, but I mean, I don't know. Yeah, but that is true. Yeah, people would rather just record. There are the whole bystanders who just actually do it just to record and not actually to help. But so I mean that's the narco tyranny. I think it'll just get worse and worse.
Right.
So is your next question going to be, what was the Tulsa massacre?
I mean, I feel like that event's been rewritten a lot.
Yes.
Like, I'm not entirely sure what happened in that, because you have like the HBO, what was that?
Watchmen.
They did like Watchmen on HBO, which was a terrible TV show that got canceled after one season. And then they tried to say it was a limited series afterwards when they didn't sell it as such beforehand. And it's like, I watched 2 episodes and like, this is bad and boring. But yeah, it's like they try to really hammer in on that. And it's just like so many events. I wonder how much our history has been infected with, just for a narrative. Like, to me, like the example that's probably been most on my mind is like how the United States got into World War I. And I think the Zimmerman telegram was one of the primary reasons. I'm like, that had to have been fake, right? Because there's no way the Germans would want a failed state in Mexico to attack the United States. Like, that's not a realistic plan, is it? Mexico's embroiled in the Civil War and they want the Mexicans to attack the United States for like land promises. Like, that's not a realistic plan. But is that real? But the real reason the United States entered World War I was because J.P. Morgan was the largest creditor of the Triple Entente, and if the Triple Entente would lose, they would default on all that debt. So he lobbied Congress to get it, to get the war train going. And it's like, that's why America went into that war, because we didn't, get anything out of it except for our credit, our loans, or the rich people's loans. So it's kind of like, how much of our history, you got a lot of people nowadays questioning the moon landing again. I think questioning 9/11's in vogue as well.
No, that one's a little.
Yeah, I mean, there's problems with the United States narrative, and Vivek Ramaswamy apparently got into trouble because he said that the Saudis were more involved.
Yeah, I mean, they're now openly admitting the Saudi involvement, which probably leads back to somewhere else.
Yeah, so it's
I mean, well, like history. So like, you're going to have like basically regime history. And so I think they're just like after the founding in the 19th century, you have a bunch of historians writing about the United States, and when they're positive, they kind of talk about how it's Christian. There's a kind of a positivity towards the country. Like, this goes even in like in the 20th century. There's a sort of positivity, and now what we're seeing, like, there's a positivity towards like the big figures, you know what I mean, like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, those guys. And now what you're seeing, you still have positivity, but it's actually towards the so-called marginalized and the people who overcome. So the regime, like
the first black person to do something.
Yeah. So like if you look at, like, so history's
something like that.
The people who the people who matter and don't matter, or the heroes and the villains, kind of, that show up in the history, that kind of tells you what the regimes, like, who are the special people in the regime. And so you think of who's the villain of American history is essentially the white male nowadays. So you can't really, you generally, like, regime approved history cannot really say anything positive about them unless it has something to do with the favored groups, and the favored groups are essentially the non-white or the women. And so those are now the heroes that people overcame, and that progresses into like essentially to become a like a hero in our society today. You have to overcome this kind of past oppression that was forced upon you by essentially white males. So I think that's how like the history is just a way to kind of move us into the future, kind of establish the hero villain dichotomy, and point
And
to
I
the
think there are
future.
times where there's a hero in history, and there's times when there's no hero in history, and it's just two villains fighting each other, or maybe there's two people fighting each other that are kind of both good, but they're just circumstances out of their control, or uh, you know they're just forced to fight each other for even no good reason. Uh, I mean, history is a lot more complicated than you know, than they try to make it seem in history. Or you can look at the Civil War. American Civil War is a clear example of that. But there's a lot about our history that has a very shady narrative thrown on it, and if you dare question the regime narrative, you're going to get canceled for being racist and all that other stuff. um, I want to move on to another so-called controversy, but I first want to remind you all to smash the like button to help the live stream get that out there. It helps with the live stream. But if you are new to the channel, definitely subscribe, because that is one of the best things you can do to help videos and this channel grow. So we'd appreciate that, as well as the audio listeners later on. Smash that subscribe button as well. So one of the things that's kind of fascinated me is your relationship with Canon Press. I believe it was after you tweeted the white evangelicals are the lone bulwark against moral insanity. They kind of dunked on you for that. Am I correct, or did they dunk on you for something else?
I think that they expressed disagreement with it.
And then I see that the roles have kind of flipped a little bit, where they're publishing this. It's Gilder, right? Who's written this book that has like these excerpts from the book that I've seen are all like divine feminine energy thing. And it's like, marriage was invented by God to civilize man, because, man is too uncivil and primal and needs to be civilized. And that's what women in marriage do. And women are sexually superior to men. It's all this weird type of divine feminine energy stuff. And it's weird. And then you've expressed disagreement with them, and they're kind of like doubling down on this material. So I'm kind of interested to know, is like, if you ever have another book, is Canon Press going to be your go-to for publishing, or are you going to look like elsewhere? Or are you guys just adults disagreeing on things, or is there
Yeah, I mean,
maybe
I can genuinely say that. Yeah, I'm still. Yeah, there's no like hard feelings with them. We've still text back and forth, and we still talk back and forth. I mean, we emails, texts. I talked to the acquisition editor on the phone, so about a month ago. So yeah, there's no hard feelings. We're not a bunch of, I don't know, like schoolgirls with hard feelings. But yeah, I mean, I would publish with them again. I mean, the thing is, like, so they published the book. I didn't like some of the language in the book. I disagree with it. But I mean, Canon. Think about it. Canon published my book, and it was, even though they're kind of not, they're not new to controversy and some of the claims I make in the book. There still is like my method and other assumptions in the book. I think, generally speaking, is not what the Canon crowd would affirm. So they do publish books that they do not necessarily agree with, or that they know will be kind of controversial even among their own kind of their audience. But they did kind of double down on it. But that's also kind of also what they do.
it is Doug
It's
Wilson's brand to double down on everything. It's
Yeah,
just who he
yeah,
is. Even if he wants to
yeah.
nuance it afterwards, it comes with the double down. Everyone in that camp kind of likes to double down on things like, what was it? Credo baptism leads to transgenderism, and they double down on that. And even though that's kind of a ridiculous argument on the prima facie, it's just a ridiculous argument. But nonetheless, what was it?
Yeah, well, the problem there is that they defended. Yeah, I mean the claim is dumb, but there's more to. They shouldn't lose credibility for that guy. But anyway, just yeah, but I mean that's kind of what canon does. And again, there's just no hard feelings. And I'm not saying this to like try to not create controversy with them, but it's just genuine. I could text Brian Cole
Okay.
right now, and he'd probably
I just
respond and
wonder
say,
because
"Oh,
it's
cool."
like
So yeah,
it is interesting, to see, a publisher and an author kind of like disagree on social media like that. I'm like, is there beef? Is like, is this how I'd like to be treated if because I have a book that's eventually going to come out when I do all this post editing paperwork kind of stuff, which I hate doing. But I got to do it. But it's like, I just kind of wonder because I'm trying to enter in the game of I'm gonna do one nonfiction Christian book, and then that's gonna be it for me and my nonfiction book selling at all. That's my plan, but I just kind of wonder because professional curiosity, so to speak. So it's interesting that you guys are all adults, and it's kind of on brand for you as well to get cheeky on social media and stuff like that. And to maybe troll, but you went publicly disagreeing with them, they publicly disagree with you, and it's still a friendly relationship at the end of the day because
yeah, but I mean, it
make
was also
enemies
kind of in
over
good
time.
fun too, because they said like, to be clear, this is dumb on my post, and then I responded back to them. So it's just kind of fun. Like if I didn't like Canon Press, you guys would definitely know I didn't like them. I think if you follow me on Twitter, you'll kind of gather who I don't care for.
So
So
it
if
beats
I didn't
working for
like those
Disney.
guys, I would definitely do more than I've done. But anyway.
We do got some fan mail for you. Jeremy says, just want to say base. Love you guys. Can't wait for your next book, Dr. Wolfe.
Oh, okay.
Any word on what that might be or anything in the works?
I'm lazy and I'm trying to be a terrible farmer. I spent about half the day today on the tractor. So I'm lazy when it comes to writing. But yeah, I want to write. So I'm, in fact, yeah, I won't show you my notes, but I'm writing notes on a book on just on home. Like, what does it mean to be? What does home mean? So home means a lot of things. It means home in your house. It means homeland.
Blood and
Also,
soil.
yeah, I mean there's aspects of that a little bit.
So I guess one of the other things is like back a few months ago, it's like you were getting accused of racial dog whistling for saying, which way Western man or invoking that language in your book or Twitter account. It's like
that's just like there's that guy from Reason who's
that's
like
a meme, right? Like,
yeah, I mean he's just a midwit. I mean, so
no, that was Virgil Walker.
Well, yeah, but I mean that it's midwit rhetoric, and I don't mean that as an insult. So I mean, I guess it is in effect, but I mean that it's to say like, oh, you used a phrase from a guy who was like this and that, and he was said this and that. Like you literally have used some words, and then somehow link that up to say, well, Wolf's a white supremacist. It's just silly, dumb rhetoric. It works for maybe social media when you have a following of midwits. Or you have your website's called Reason. Reason. I'm going to use stupid rhetoric like
I mean, they have some pretty bad articles whenever they try to address faith matters.
Oh,
it's
it's
libertarian.
They're a joke. The Reason is a joke. So it's yeah, like libertarians they like to play up this idea of reason, but that's a whole different discussion. They don't know the first things of logic or thinking properly, but yeah, so that's silly. Like honestly, if anyone spends any time online, they'll know that which way Western man is a common.
It's a meme, but maybe even that guy co-opted in order to, invoke some sort of white supremacist message. Like I kind of saw that as a meme, and it's like the fact that you were kind of accused of a racial dog whistle, which is a very liberal term. Dog whistles again. Democrat like. Yeah. I never heard of Republicans accusing Democrats of dog whistling until maybe after Democrats started using that term on Republicans, because everything's sort of everything in, Donald Trump was saying in like 2017 was code for white supremacy and stuff like that, and the liberal media was trying to go after him, and all these terms kind of like came back in vogue.
The OK symbol.
Yeah, which is a 4chan troll, but we do got a super chat question. For $10, Chief of Sinners ask, what helpful strategies can be employed against pity play maneuver, page 107 of The Sociopath Next Door by Martha Stout, that modern Jacobins use to disarm their targets? So I guess this is a question about good citizenry and
pity play. Maybe it's too late for me to know what that is. It's too late over here in North Carolina.
So Jacobins want to disarm their target. I think we can use context clues for that part, right?
I mean, the idea that someone, I mean, there is this kind of appeal to pity, a victim, to become a victim, and then I think it's probably more like empathy. I think empathy is the big problem. It's essentially unbridled. I like to say unbridled empathy. It affects women and women adjacent men or males. And so you have, essentially you have people kind of lose their mind in the streets, and then you have empathy for them, even though it's both destructive to them and people, the empathizers. But I don't know what pity play is. I wish I did.
It's described as
okay. There you go. Yeah. So I would just say,
empathy.
I mean, how to fight against it? It's very. I mean, it's hard because it's. I think first of all, you kind of have to point out for like what it is, and you have to, I think, call men to stop. I mean, this is the problem: is that when you have a sort of gynocratic regime, a gynocratic era, the way for men to gain power is essentially be empathetic to excessive degrees, kind of like women can be. And so that's what we mean by female adjacent. To be female adjacent, like, so that's just a phrase I borrowed from the left. They like to talk about white adjacency. Have you heard that? To be white, like Asians are white adjacent. That's why they're successful. Yes. So to become female, when you're female adjacent, a female adjacent man or male is essentially adopting or conforming to the habits of a gynocratic, female dominated space. And that's how they gain power. Like that's how they can be relevant and have good standing. And so men then start adopting this unbridled empathy. In some ways, maybe it's natural to them, or maybe it's just kind of them figuring out the strategy to how to kind of gain clout and standing. I think, like, first of all, I think just call men to dignity so that they don't don't have unbridled empathy, that they actually can judge a situation for what it is and not be naive and say what needs to be said. And you saw this recently online with that woman from San Francisco who was like, some guy walked up to her and said like, "Oh, I'm going to rape you," or whatever. And she had that. Do you see that video? Like a 2-minute video of her saying, I don't know. I can't feel safe in San Francisco anymore. And then Matt Walsh posted and says, "I have no sympathy for this woman." And then all these other people got offended by him. Why don't you have sympathy for this woman?
She voted for that.
Yeah, like it's
like undoubtedly you're a single white woman living in San Francisco. I mean, did you not vote for that?
So for men, it's like, well, how do you solve this problem? Well, you don't start talking about her feelings. You don't think about, oh, that the guy who said it must be mentally disturbed. No, you think, what policy is going to fix this problem? Like, how are we going to solve this problem? And so you take out all that, like, oh, I feel bad for her. Let's say, let's be understanding. No, it's just like, stop voting for liberals. Like, stop voting for the left. That's what it comes down to. So that's just one example, but I think that's it. You have to call men to be assertive and judge a situation rightly. Don't be taken in by emotions. Don't be manipulated. Yeah, and also, like, just realize that if you're in this female centered world, that where you're kind of called to be like that, and you just have to resist it. You have to fight it and call it out. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how else to do it.
Is empathy a scam?
Well, I mean, there's something good about it. Like you can empathize with someone who's in pain, or like because you've had the pain as well. Certainly, if someone's like my father recently died about a year ago, and so I certainly understand someone whose father has recently passed away. So there is like empathy is good. It's like you can kind of be in that person's shoes. Like, wow, yeah, I can understand. And
I mean, I know the
um,
biblical, Jesus sympathizes with our weaknesses. It doesn't say he empathizes with them. So I just kind of
well,
like wonders, like our whole linguistic change to say sympathy is not enough. You got to empathize. I'm like, huh. And then you see that, also with the rise of social emotional learning. So we have like a massive shift towards focusing on emoting
yeah.
as a
Well, I
society.
mean, it
So
just goes
I
back.
just wonder.
I mean, it just goes back to like the Emmett Till thing. It's like, well, when I think of that, I guess I'm a cold, rational male or whatever. But when I think of the situation, horrible situation, regardless of the facts of the matter, it seems whether there's murder or not. I understand there's like controversy on that kind of, but it's like, well, okay, well, let's look at this rationally according to our situation today, and even then, and get away from this. Oh, this like people are offended, like they were so emotionally offended by the fact that I don't like dwell upon this every other day about what happened in 1955 or whatever, or that every year I'm not going to sort of genuflect over this event that it happened in a state that's
I don't even know what state it
oh
was, but
Mississippi, the
was it
poorest state in the
Mississippi? Oh, I'm
country,
sorry, I just
that
lost you guys for a second.
that no
You
one
still got
cares
me?
about at any other time of the year.
Everything suddenly turned off. You hear me?
okay. Yeah. You didn't
Okay.
quite disappear, but you kind of stopped.
Okay,
So,
I'm not sure what
but
happened.
we kind of,
Anyway, yeah. So you got that's input. Like, yeah. So I guess I'm the least sympathetic person ever. But that's the sort of thing I'm talking about. Where instead of having this emotional reaction to some event where it's clearly propaganda, it's clearly you're being manipulated. It's clearly you're trying to be empathetic with this event that you're so far distanced. Most people are so far distanced from. It doesn't actually say anything about your life or the real world you live in, but yet you're supposed to identify it. That's unbridled empathy that needs to be cut off from people so that you can actually solve actual world life real problems, and not be manipulated. So that's kind of what I'm talking about. That's a long answer for that. I don't know, to super chat. Do I get that money or you guys get that money? How does this
man,
work? I answered the question. Don't I get
you
the
answered the
money for
question. I don't know how it works. Like, we'll get like
how much was that?
7.
$10?
Yes, but we'll get
Who
like
sent that?
maybe 7 of it, or I don't know. They take their cut, but YouTube already like lowered. Like, I think ad rates have gone like really downhill this month. Like ad,
Okay.
ad rates like plummeted. So you don't across the board,
I'm
not
just
just
kidding.
in this.
Just kidding.
But anyway, Anthony has read your book. He might have some questions
Oh yeah,
lined up.
I got a couple.
All
So
right,
one of the things I
fire away.
mentioned in my review is one of the core principles of the case for Christian nationalism is the notion of particularity, and the objective drawback to his work is the lack of particulars. So one thing I kind of want to hash out are what are 3 issues that Christians should be prioritizing politically, and we're just going to take abortion off the table because that's just the obvious one. So I mean, is there like
What, 3
certain
other
issue?
issues or?
Yeah, 3 other issues from abortion. What would be like the priority items for like step 1 of Christianizing a nation?
Okay, so by particulars you mean like the action plan, like what do we do from here?
Yes.
Okay.
A triage of action.
Yeah. I think it depends on like if you think about national policy or local policy or state policy or just interpersonal life. I think all those are going to be different. I think national policy immigration is essential. Uh, yeah, because that's essentially immigration is largely controlled by the federal government at this point. So I think immigration control, and I would, if we're up to, I mean, if I could do it, I would just say zero, very limited legal immigration and absolutely zero illegal immigration.
I mean,
And
we're at
and
an
that's
inflated economy that I don't see how we can sustain millions of immigrants each year when we have, I don't know what the ratio is. Like, the ratio between public sector and private sector jobs is like near 50% in a lot of places. So our economy is very fake.
yeah.
Like we don't have enough jobs, so to speak, and we want to reduce the size of government, not, and if half the labor force is like government adjacent, I don't see how you can have the immigration flows that we have. Like, this isn't the late 1800s where we're just booming economically.
But yeah, it's not just economics. It's that most immigrants tend to vote for Democrats, and I think
And
Democrats are. I mean, that's one reason. So
I mean, there's a reason why they
Dem-
want
Democrats
amnesty.
Democrats have absolutely the most insane policies you can imagine. And that on the social side, I mean, economics, I guess, a little bit different, but the social side, like transing kids, is just like insane. And yet most immigrants still vote for Democrats. That's one reason, but I think that there's other reasons that are less visible to a lot of people. So I was just in Scottsbluff, Nebraska. Now, probably you guys have never been there,
Nope.
and I was talking to people there. I was there for a few days. A friend of mine is a pastor there, and he was telling me that the 1/3 of the population is essentially Hispanic now. And
This
only
is a
20
small
years ago,
town.
yeah, it was like a small town, and almost like 20 years ago, it was very, very few Hispanics. And now they're dealing with, like, they have a lot of drug issues. They have obviously intercultural issues. They have social system issues. Schools are now dealing with like English as second language issues. There's also just general cultural. I mean, and these guys never really voted for it. I mean, they never voted to have their town transformed demographically. You ask them, I didn't ever ask them, but if you ask them, are you racist? And they deny it up and down. But when you have that massive flow in a small town of a lot of culturally different people, it disrupts the way of life of the place. So this is happening all over the country. Just about 10 miles from me, there's a town that's very similar, where it used to be kind of a somewhat, like, I guess, middle class, maybe lower middle class, just kind of North Carolina town. And now it's like 1/3 Hispanic again, and dealing with the same issues as the other one. Now, nothing against Hispanic people, but when you have that sort of kind of influx of people at a high rate, it disrupts kind of
Yeah.
the community
We
itself.
we
So
live in
anyway,
Maryland. We
that's
live in Maryland, which is probably the most diverse state in the country in terms of,
okay.
it's not just, New York City's obviously pretty
Yeah.
diverse, but it's not the entirety of the state. But I mean, the entirety of Maryland is pretty uh not homogenous, the opposite of that, ethnically and all that. So I mean, you definitely see it. So I guess we're used to it. We haven't seen, like, we never grew up in a world where it was like only white people, and then, there goes the neighborhood or anything like that. Like that's. But you're describing like
Yeah, I mean,
entire
so
towns
I
where.
grew up in California, and I was born in the 80s. Father was born in California in the 40s, and that state has just utterly transformed from kind of this, like, the golden state to really kind of a dump.
Yeah.
And it's
No,
not, well, I
the
mean,
the
well,
Hispanic
I mean,
population doubled between the
well,
censuses.
yeah, with some, I mean, this isn't so much, not necessarily a demographic issue, apart from the fact that they tend to vote for Democrats. But it's just the fact that it's been radically transformed. Places where that used to be kind of a heavy kind of like Irish ancestry, kind of in the Bay Area, are now utterly, they're gone. Like, there's no, it's essentially a minority, like a white people are the minority in these places. So anyway, there's just this massive change culturally in a state very rapidly within one generation, and that's just no one. I mean, people didn't ask for that. So anyway, but that
Immigration
I
number
guess,
one.
yeah, that was a long explanation.
Uh,
All right, where else? Yeah, so I think at the state level, the state, because of the federal system, states can have a lot of power. I think that's where the Christian nationalism can actually do really well, potentially, which is that the state governors can essentially kind of be a resistance to the federal government, and that sort of thing. So I think that the state level is really where we're gonna make our money. But I think the important thing is for, like, us, because it's easy for us to talk about politics every day and to talk about policy. But I think like we ought to actively in our personal lives meet like-minded people locally, not just to share ideas, but also try to establish networks of like of service of products,
Parallel
food.
economy.
Yeah, a sort of alternative counter economy or parallel economy, something like that. We should all kind of seek after something like that. It's not maybe not possible for everyone, but I think that is what we'll need. Partly because I think young people like yeah, when you have these relational networks at kind of the local level, younger people can then find ways to get employment that is dignified work and also doesn't require them to, spout off the woke nonsense in the corporate sphere. So they can like, so it kind of gives them an avenue for dignified work and that. So I think that there's probably more I could say on all that, but just leave it at that.
Yeah, I mean, I
Yeah.
like how you kind of like stratify, if that's the correct word, between like the different levels of governance, even going down to kind of like self-governance and how there's stuff you can do to implement Christian nationalism in your own life with the parallel economy. And then on the federal level, the best we can really do is like immigration, reform might be an understatement of what needs an overhaul, basically, of what the current system is. And you kind of allude to the idea of replacement theory because, the idea that certain demographics don't vote Republican, they vote Democrat. And, the Democrat policies are objectively evil. I mean, and the people that try to, push back on that clearly have not read the, Democrat Party platform of, 2020, which is easily available. But even if you go back to 2012, this is the thing: the grooming children was in the Democrat Party platform in 2012. They telegraphed exactly what they were going to do, and then they did it. And now people are waking up and saying, we didn't ask for that, or we didn't vote for this. And you see some people trying to leave the left and say that the left left them. It's like, no, that was in their platform 10 years ago. So they are fulfilling their their logical conclusion. If you read the current platform, it is Marxism on every page, pretty much. So this is where they're going to head. They're going to turn us into something more like Trudeau's Canada, and the Republicans are largely too stupid to stop themselves from becoming the Canadian Conservative Party, that their CCP. So it's a that's where they want to take things. And then on the state level, again, you point out that the governors have the most power. I mean, you definitely see that with Ron DeSantis in the Disney fight. You see that in some other governors as well. I got to give Greg Abbott some credit though for lining the Rio Grande River with the buoys as a barrier to illegal immigration. Got to give him some credit for that because
Third
the
term's
federal
the
government's
try,
fighting him on
right?
that. Yes, it took him 3 terms to do something meaningful to address the issue, but he can be moved even if he's, not on our side. It's interesting that the Republican base has moved a lot in the last, since 2014, because that's when the environment was primed for Trump and all that. The Republican Party base has moved so much that now our governors are, the governors that aren't on our side, like Glenn Youngkin goes to a woke church. He's a liberal in real life, but he'll govern more conservatively because he wants to advance his own career. And then Greg Abbott might do the same, although he's not running for president, oddly enough. It's very interesting to see how radicalized the, right wing is getting in a good way, and how that's transforming, mediocre politicians into stepping up and giving giving the dog better bones than they used to. I don't know if you had anything to say on like how the, Republican right wing politics has changed in the last 10 years. And
Yeah, I mean, like in substance, I think it's there's problems, but I think that like there's a lot of people on like so-called conservatives who are now essentially like pro-trans. So
Right.
of course, like it's that's what conservatives do, is they just become the liberal of yesteryear, whatever.
Which you even mentioned in your book.
Yeah, but yeah, but the what was I going to say? The yeah, but I think that the right what's promising, and this is being kind of injected into conservatism and the right, is the importance of government power in achieving goals. So if there actually is, like, we're not in the 80s and 90s where, I mean, there's things we could have done then too, but we have to think that we're not in this sort of neutral world where we can kind of get along and get along with each other. We're in a world where literally these people are morally insane, and we have to use power. I mean, I don't know. It's weird how, like, you hear David French and what's his name, Jonah Goldberg, and these other guys talking about the moderate. Like, what's the moderate position is like yeah, we're pro trans, but we just don't want, and we're
After 18,
pro
right?
trans for kids.
After 18, you can do the surgery, but maybe even before that, you can
But
do
before
the
that, yeah, you
puberty.
can, the whole
Yeah.
pronoun thing, like yeah. So in 10 years, what is the moderate position? Like, what is Jonah Goldberg going to believe then? In
I mean,
2030,
the idea of being socially
know,
liberal, fiscally conservative, so it's like you're a communist that wants a good budget. Like, you want to trans kids, but you want a balanced budget. Like, what does that even mean anymore? But
yeah,
you talk
it's
about
yeah.
neutrality, and it's interesting because there were multiple hurdles to overcome, but the first one is on information. I think conservatives finally realized that media isn't neutral. So conservatives, I think, first rejected that neutrality was neutral in media, and you see this with Trump going after the fake news and all that. Um, once they realized that that the media isn't neutral, then you started seeing people that, hey, society isn't neutral either, and you're kind of seeing the unraveling of the matrix. I mean, it's taking a lot longer than it should. Like, it took too long to realize that the media wasn't neutral, but now you're seeing that people are realizing that society isn't neutral as well. um,
Yeah, I think that's right. And people are nostalgic for like the 80s and 90s, and no, not even that. Like, just the like the James Lindsays of the world. If we could just get back to 2014, like 2014, where people, there's gay marriage, everyone's happy, and let's just go back to that point. And so there's a nostalgia for that, and Christians are nostalgic for maybe the 80s and 90s or early 2000s or something like that. Thinking that, that's the neutral world where we can all kind of just get along. And but yeah, that was a predictably temporary affair. And of course there was like a moral underpinning of even that era, so it wasn't even neutral. But yeah,
does
it's
America have a golden age?
I don't know. That's good question. I don't I couldn't say when there was a golden age. Like,
I
if
mean, you got to think
I
that the
mean, there's
Eisenhower years might have been pretty good because America was like materially wealthy and
okay.
height of power, so, in
I mean,
some
I
respects.
guess you could say
So
like the
maybe you could say that was
50s
a
maybe,
golden
but
age.
That's not really an age. It's just a
yeah, I
decade.
mean, I don't really want to commit to like if there's a golden age, but
It's just a fascinating question because
yeah.
you know if you're talking about nostalgia, it's like, nostalgia for what? Do we have a golden age? You're saying, the 80s aren't really a golden age for America because we have all these other problems going on. So I'm like, what is our golden age? I've heard some people say the gilded age. I'm like, I don't know about that, but it just makes you
Well, it's
think.
called the Gilded for a reason.
Yeah.
Uh,
I think like the problem with nostalgia is that, like, you can separate nostalgia and memory. So memory is where you actually have memory of, like, personal memory, or like maybe like memory like within the family of events. So you have kind of the stories. And I wouldn't say like the story of your grandfather, but my grandfather on my dad's side was from New York, and they kind of hitchhiked to California. So there's that story. That's not really nostalgia of that. But But nostalgia can be this thing where we have this idealized picture of something that we then try to get back to. And the problem, conservatives kind of have that mentality, but instead of having this like reactionary, nostalgic turn, I think we should take the best of our history and our tradition, understand the realities on the ground now, and move forward into the future. And kind of realizing that in a way we're never gonna return to, at least within our lifetime, we're never going to return to the 1780s, for many reasons. Or the 1770s. But that at the same time, those principles and those actions can kind of inform what we do in the future. So,
Anthony?
All right.
yeah.
So one thing I wanted to ask was how influential, or what was the impact of Donald Trump within the concept of the Christian Prince? And this isn't saying Donald Trump is a Christian, but like obviously the rise of Trump. Like to me, when I read the chapter, the rise of Trumpism was probably on the forefront of my mind. Just this is what people wanted Trump to be, not necessarily what he was.
Yeah, that's good. I haven't thought of that. I wonder if there has been. Yeah, it's interesting. People point out things about the book, and then I have to realize, maybe I guess there was an influence there. I think Trump, like I thought that Trump in 2016, he was like sometimes I call it like the Trump event, which like the idea that Trump was like an event in history. So you separate the person. He's a guy who showed up on the scene in history politically and made a significant break, and nothing afterwards. Like they can't return. Like it's an utter new possibilities opened up. So like events in history would be like American Revolution, the French Revolution, the Civil War, World
Because
War II.
that's the chapter.
All these are like all these.
Because that's the chapter that gets the most flack. Of all the chapters in the book, that's the one that probably gets the most flack, is this idea of the Christian Prince. And I think it is tied to people's, or particularly those that are detractors, their perception of Donald Trump. Because I mean, after that you have Right of Revolution, which I would say is like, how do you not get anything on that chapter? Basically, advocating.
I got some, but I think because people know, like again, Trump. It's smart to like point this out, like in connection with Trump, because Trump opened up this possibility of like the populist, charismatic leader of the people. I mean, he shifted just take like a state like Iowa, which used to be
a Democrat state,
a swing state, and Trump completely turned it into one of the strongest Republican, like pro-Republican states in the country. And so anyway, like this a certain leader who changes things that can't change back. And I think the Christian Prince is kind of like that. And that's why I described this Christian Prince in kind of more charismatic terms. Someone who cannot, you don't want, like, I thought about, like, at first, like, I'll talk about the civil magistrate or the civil ruler, but that sounds like magistrate sounds like he's like Paul Ryan could be a Christian magistrate, something like that. Or just a policy wonk.
Prince. I mean, I read that it was a Machiavellian term, because Machiavelli.
Yeah, I mean, I actually did not have Machiavelli in mind when I wrote it. I had actually more in mind it was very common. I mean, the reason why Machiavelli called it the Prince is because everyone called it Prince back then, and he just wanted to talk about the Prince. And we just happened, because of the canon of Western political thought, that's the Prince. So anyway, but if you read like the 16th, 17th century and earlier, they're always talking about the Christian Prince. It's very common. But yeah, I mean, I didn't use Machiavellian terms or language in the chapter, but you do need someone who's going to show up, or who's going to kind of appear in history and be this like rallying figure for a kind of a sort of return to the heritage of faith in the country. I don't know how, apart from like this sort of unprecedented like spiritual awakening that leads to politics and all that. like purely from the ground up without some sort of figurehead. I think that we need someone to like arise and be that
Basically,
sort of
like the
earth shaker,
Israelites,
I guess.
basically the Israelites in the desert, and oh, they see God, and then they're just like, no, we don't want to, we don't want it. Moses, go before us, because the thundering, booming of the Lord, basically, and they're too frightened of God, so they just say, Moses, do it for us, kind of like an abdication.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
And
I kind of have in mind like, yeah, people like have weird thought like, well, what is he talking about? Like, I think in the American context, I'm thinking like George Washington, like real because George Washington, like even after his death, like the average family would have some kind of figure of Washington in their living room, like a painting or some kind of like sculpture or a bust somewhere in their living room. He was so revered, like you see it in his farewell, like his farewell address, which I kind of read as him saying, "Look, I've served my country for decades. I'm done. I'm tired. You guys have to deal with it." Because at the end, he says, "Look, you have the same religion, you have the same culture, you fought this war together, you have the same struggles and sacrifices. You are a people, and you can be a people. But I'm leaving, so exit." And he held the country together in that massive change from being colonies into the United States. And so he was, I mean, he was a sort of Christian prince. I mean, there's questions of his faith and all that, but he was kind of that for the founding of America. And yet he was actually had high decorum. He was orderly and submitted, basically abided by the Constitution. So I don't mean someone who's just going to show up and like tear up the Constitution and like destroy the rule of law and all that sort of thing. So, but yeah. So I think like just think of George Washington like some sort of modern figure like that. But
the follow-up I would have is, do you take a like Paul Gottfried approach, and in that right-wing authoritarianism is the only political path to save Western civilization? And I emphasize political.
You were breaking up, but you're asking whether the Paul Gottfried approach, right-wing authoritarianism, is that the solution?
Is that the only political solution?
yeah, I'm not familiar with what he says on that.
I mean, maybe you've heard of the phrase
I would-
Protestant Franco.
Yeah, a Protestant Franco.
Franco. I see. I don't know. I think it's like who in people are going to want me to like commit to yes, Protestant Franco, but I just don't know if I don't know if like 20 years ago we were going to say like, yeah, in 2016 Donald Trump is going to become president and he's going to be this like earth shattering figure, like norm shattering figure. You'd think, well, that's crazy. Why would he want him to do that? And that he wouldn't do that. So I don't know, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, I don't know specifically what sort of person that has to be for the moment. Somehow Trump for that moment was perfect. He destroyed the media. He would mock them. He would use them kind of against themselves. Like he'd use them for himself and also to discredit them at the same time. He exposed the deep state. He yeah. So anyway, yeah, I don't know if I don't know. I don't know in 10, 20 years who exactly what sort of figure
I mean, would you say it would have to be more authoritarian in nature?
I think it should. Well, I think in the United States, at least, it would have to be within the confines of the Constitution as a sort of contract between the federal government and the states, such that the state governor can resist the federal government. So I do think there is. So I don't think it should be authoritarianism. I think there should be a sort of authoritative approach at the state level where the state governor can resist the federal government. I just don't know what it even look like for an American leader to be an authoritarian who then
Because that's the thing about
undermines utterly the federalist system and the, I don't even know what that would look like. But I think just the best thing to say is that we should stay within the confines of the Constitution, by which I don't mean post World War II constitutional interpretation, ridiculous interpretations of the 14th Amendment, and all that, but the older understanding in the end of the 19th century.
So it's interesting that you say, because Christian nationalism can look different in different parts of the world because, again, nations are different and how you would implement that is different. The times are different, the needs are different, and the biblical responses to those need to be tailored to the societies in which they're in. Like, I guess I'm not really a theonomist, and I know you're not really a theonomist. And one of the reasons is, there's not a, Bible verse on, transing kids is wrong and how to exactly navigate that, but we know because the law is written on our heart that this is absolutely abhorrent and should be punished. Modern solutions or modern problems require modern solutions, as Dave Chappelle once put it. So in terms of Christian nationalism, like, do you see any global examples, or say, let's start out with modern day? Do you see like Viktor Orban as like an example, or like president of Uganda? I don't know what his name is, or like the Zambians, because they have a very Christian nationalist constitution that they have. Do you see like those as modern examples of Christian nationalism, or?
Yeah, I see those as in part Christian nationals. I think Hungary is probably the best example. I don't think it's like you said, every nation's different. So Hungary isn't necessarily a model for us, as if we need to look at how they've arranged themselves but the fact that the Hungarians have this kind of collective will for themselves, that as Hungarians, and to say that we are going to remain Hungarian and not kind of succumb to the pressure of the EU and outside pressure, I think that's absolutely a necessary principle that we would have to, as the United States, apply to ourselves. So yeah, I think that's one example. I know Uganda passed like the like anti-gay law. I don't know anything else about Uganda other than that law. But I think just generally the willingness to say this is right, this is who we are, and we're going to actually act for our own good.
I mean, Uganda is about 87%, I think, religiously identifies as Christian, 13% Muslim. Yeah. And within the Christian breakdown, it's like Catholic, Anglican, other Protestant. So there's just some fun facts about Uganda. So I think that's a fascinating. Zambia, I think, there's a reason why it's Vodi Bakum that's in Zambia. Right? He's in Zambia, right?
Yeah.
So there's a reason why he's there, and advancing the kingdom there and all that. And is at a seminary there, if I ever recall. So there's a lot of stuff going on in Zambia. I look at Viktor Orban and I see that this is because I think he's Reformed Protestant, and I see, like, if you look at the statistics regarding Hungary as a nation, and then they have this Reformed Protestant leader. He's not like perfect or anything. Like, his COVID policy was atrocious, but other than that, he's made it difficult for left-wing politics to get elected in this country. He's taken steps on, the gay stuff and trying to do something about the immigration crisis in Europe. So you see him as a, Christian leader in some respects, but it's also like Christianity, because of, you could call it Christian nationalism in Hungary, has an outsized influence in that nation that they statistically don't really have. Like, Hungary is not that Christian of a nation, yet because of a strong man leader, it projects that more than I blacked out for a second. It projects that more than what you would expect. Does that make sense, what I said?
Yeah, no. So they are in a Hungary in a kind of formal sense, you could say, is Christian. I don't know what their constitution or constituting documents say, but they'll talk about themselves as a Christian. I had a conversation, must have been about 10 months ago or so, with actually Hungarians. They were from, they weren't like American, like Hungarian Americans. They were Hungarians from Hungary, and I talked about religion. And the thing, everyone would, Hungary would identify as Christian, usually among like Protestant or Roman Catholic. Almost all of them are Paedo Baptists, and very, very low religiosity, except when they have a child, they get their child baptized. And if they don't baptize their child, it's actually weird. So it's something that very expected that you'd have a child to get baptized. So there is a high, a type of cultural Christianity in Hungary. And there's a self-conception as Christian. The problem is it's they don't have high religiosity in practice. So that's
converting that perception to genuine belief.
But now it appears that those with a religiosity have an outstretched influence or outsized influence compared to their actual group.
Well, so I think it's also just so deeply wedded to the Hungarian idea of itself.
Right.
So to not be like, to be Hungarian is to be Christian, and it's part of the self-conception.
So that's the self-conception we need to bring back to the United States, that America's this Christian nation. Our leaders should be Christian, our culture should be Christian, and then you could get like a strong Christian leader in office once again. Because I'm not sure, I don't know if you were to reckon, like, when's the last time we had a Christian leader, a Christian president of the United States? I mean, Eisenhower, maybe.
Yeah, Calvin Coolidge. I don't know Alvin Eisenhower's faith, but I mean he certainly enacted a bunch of like pro-Christian. What was it that he?
In God We Trust is the official motto.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Under God and the Pledge of Allegiance. Something about you can't be gay and work for the federal government. I think was Eisenhower, because you would be a liability for blackmail, stuff like that in the Cold War.
But I mean, the thing is, though, that this is one of the myths that like conservatives have believed since, like, I don't know, probably at least by Reagan and after Reagan. And that's this idea the United States is really just kind of a melting pot or a kind of salad bowl of different religions. Doesn't matter what religion you are. The self-conception of the country is it's just kind of this open, like an open society for anyone. But that actually, for most of American history, that just was not the case. People throughout the 19th century, Americans understood themselves to be a Christian people. Early 20th century, even like left-wing people identified the country as being Christian. So like I remember John Fia, like the historian, he wrote the book, like, is America a Christian nation? He made a big deal about all you conservatives think that you're part of this great Christian America tradition. But look, in the early 20th century, the progressives were Christians, or said they were Christians and believed in the social gospel, and they were left-wing. So the point being, for my purposes, is that even the left and the right in the early 20th century believed the country was Christian. And like the social gospel, like the progressives thought, well, if we are Christian, then shouldn't we have better policies to, help the poor? Shouldn't we help the marginalized? So whether those were right or wrong, the point being is that they understood, along with those to their right, that we're in a Christian country. And the Eisenhower administration, like as you mentioned, believed this as well. And I think it wasn't until like the 70s, 80s, 90s when this started to kind of slip away, and the myth of like the huddled masses of anyone from anywhere started to come about. And really the idea of the melting pot, which was conceived by a Jewish guy in New York City, like 1905, and spread through kind of the Protestant establishment into the 50s and 60s. Well, from there into the 50s, 60s, and became like the governing dogma of the United States in that period. And so, the point being, in my rambling, I guess it's getting late, so that's what I do. It's 10:30 at night. Is that everyone believed we're a Christian country until recently. and that's essentially that's Christian, or that's American history. So,
Yeah, I think if you have
but it's
another
gone
question.
now. But we need to recover that. My point is that we need a heritage of, like, we have a heritage of faith in the country, and we can, I said don't be nostalgic, but we still, because we have that heritage, we can move forward in light of that and kind of recover that. How you do that is very challenging, but nevertheless, it's still there. So we don't have to like abandon our American tradition in order to recover Christian America. It like literally is our tradition to be Christian America until a few decades ago. So we can work to recover that.
So,
Anthony, if you have
and
another.
kind of
Okay.
comparing America to Hungary, America is kind of more than two predominant Christian sects, and I use Christian loosely. And there's apostates and Orthodox sects with all these denominations. I mean, how does like the issue of first table laws be decided with a lot of the doctrinal differences that vastly exceed those that would have been present in America's founding? And is there like a line between?
You were cutting out. Can you like reconnect
I
your
think,
audio? But I think Stephen might have gotten
I
your
picked
question anyway.
it up.
Is there
Yeah,
a
so
line
first
between what's
table
permissible
duties.
versus what
Yeah.
should, what is prudent?
Yeah, so I think at the very bottom, at the very basic level, I think Sabbath laws of some form can be enacted, and if that would be Sunday. So I think that there's really nothing. Well, there's a lot more Christian, but that's a very Christian practice to say, hey, we're going to devote this time to worship. So I think that is something that should not be controversial, because it, like, even like Baptists who people who may not agree with it, they still take advantage of it on Sunday. It doesn't affect them because they already usually have Sunday off, and that they'll go to church anyway. So that's probably the least controversial, or least kind of impactful of people. But so I think that is a basic thing. That's a basic law, basic set of laws.
Well, I mean, what even is Sabbath?
But there's other laws though. What's that?
What even is
what
a
is a
Sabbath
Sabbath?
law? Because I mean, you got multiple different interpretations of the Sabbath, being like you have 1689. Obviously, Westminster's not that far off. Then you have more of your
John MacArthur has a unique view of the Sabbath.
who would actually.
Well, the thing is, even if this is not like the purpose of it's not saying you must go to church. It's saying that you can't like Wendy's isn't open, and Taco Bell and like Chili's, like the restaurants are not open. The non-essential businesses will be closed. That's basically what a Sabbath law would be. And if people have different interpretations, that's fine. But like if the Sabbatarians are in power, then they should enact those laws.
But is it prudent for, obviously forming the society? You have, let's say, 20%, or let's say it's more split, or it's not like you have 80% of it's not an overwhelming majority or 1689 Sabbatarians.
Well, he's Paedo. You're Paedo Baptist Presbyterian, right?
Yeah.
Or Westminster guys. But like, let's say, is it necessarily prudent for that to be a priority versus necessity? Like if it would violate the peace with like the MacArthur Sabbatarian or the MacArthurites, I guess.
Well, I mean, what's MacArthur going to do? Preach about it? Fine. He can stand up on Sunday and preach like, I want to go to Chili's after I'm done with the sermon. He can stand up and do that all he wants. Like, oh, I want to go to my favorite Mexican restaurant right now after church. Fine, go ahead, Pastor MacArthur. Preach on that all you want. And I don't think I don't think he's going to start a riot over it. It would be surprising that like Sun
Okay,
Valley,
what about Roll
California
Tide? What about Roll Tide evangelicals?
I don't know what's that.
Like, your Southern salt of the earth type of person that loves themselves some, football on Sundays and stuff like that.
I don't know what to tell them. I mean, they can. I don't know. I mean, this is like, I don't know, like every situation, place is going to be different. But maybe in some places, maybe it won't be prudent, I guess, if they break the peace. But I just think at the basic level that's
Because I'm not
something.
arguing the Bible would say you can't do that, just because
Yeah,
obviously I think because obviously the law of Moses has a lot of Sabbath laws in it, so it's not necessarily you can't. It's just whether you should for
yeah.
particularity purposes.
Well, this isn't. I mean, so I think one thing that I've said it so many times, like I forget to say it. When I say like we should have Sabbath laws, I'm not saying like, oh well, God says we have to do it, therefore we have to do it necessarily. We have to ban restaurants. And you're bringing up the like the permissibility prudence thing. Is it prudent? Which is exactly how I would approach something as well. And but the reason you have a Sabbath law is actually for the good of people. It's not simply to obey God, who's directed that we ought to do this, and for no other reason. It's that, hey, it's good for people to not have these distractions on Sunday, and to focus on the worship of God on that day. So it's for the good of man, and not everyone's going to agree. But I think that if you have a majority of people, or if you have a minority who wants it a lot, wants it, and then I think they should enact it. And that could be at the county level. I guess it's probably best to be at the county level. I guess the state could do it as well. But so that's just one. But I mean, like the like second table or second commandment issues. That's where things get really complicated, or not really complicated, but probably where the prudent side is best to kind of just. It's a lot of imprudent things. So that would be like the form of work. Like, so second commandment deals with kind of the form of worship. And so probably positive and negative laws with regard to that is probably not wise or necessary in the American
Because
context.
then you get into whether a TV show can portray Jesus,
Yeah.
like whether passion
Yeah.
can be made.
Yeah, that'd be challenging because that's a unique question. But yeah, well, something like that though. I mean, so in some places, of course, like in Geneva and other places, having depictions of God or having depictions of Christ was something that they would toss out, not permit, because of their understanding of depictions of the divine. But in the American context, that just wouldn't be. I don't think it would be prudent to do that. And you wouldn't even find a strong majority of people who even affirm that or even know
Yeah,
that's an issue.
or a critical mass. Yeah.
Yeah.
A couple guys in a comment section might bring it up, and that's about it.
But I do think though, like atheism, I think atheism and would be suppressed, should be suppressed. People get all freaked out about that, but I think it should be.
Evolution, Darwinian evolution, banned from
Yeah.
public schools.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I haven't actually thought about that.
Well, that's
That-
their,
that- but that could
schools,
be
right.
Yeah. But I think like atheism wouldn't necessarily be banned. It would just be kind of looked down upon, and it would be kind of socially damaging to be an atheist. And kind of like, if you're, quote unquote racist, you can like lose all sorts of social standing. It's very bad
okay.
for you.
What
I
What are
think
your
atheism
thoughts
would be the other
on
one.
religious tests for civil offices that this country was founded upon, so to speak? I assume like all the founding fathers had to pass a religious test in order to sign the Declaration of Independence or be a governor, be a
Well, I mean,
senator.
yeah, I don't know about like to be in the Continental Congress, but the Constitution said there'd be no religious test for office. So in any federal office, there's no religious test.
But the state offices did.
But the states, in many states, there was. I would say most states, Time and Klein would be able to rattle off all these in his head. But most of the states had like religious tests of some kind. They're all kind of different. Some said you have to be Protestant. Some said you have to be Trinitarian. Some said you have to believe in God and hell, or an afterlife. But yeah, there was a type of religious test. So I'm certainly for that. But at the same time, like I prefer to also have a a culture that would expect that, and we kind of still do have that. We generally have a negative feeling towards atheists, and that's why almost all
Even Joe
politicians
Biden
affirm.
says he's the most Catholic president ever.
Yeah, so you still have to be like the United States. You still have to be claimed to be religious, whether that includes like if you're Hindu, you have to be a serious Hindu.
Unless you're Vivek
Like that.
Ramaswamy.
Yeah, well, no, well, like him, didn't he just recently say that he was serious about his faith
I
as well?
mean,
So I
he's
mean,
so serious he doesn't name what God he worships.
No, he's a Vatican II Christian.
okay,
I don't know. I don't think anything's genuine about him. I just think, you say you're a Hindu, and then you're saying, oh, Judeo-Christian values is like what? But I'm digressing a little bit. Anthony, if you have another question, I'm going to read this chat by Yurter. Love your book, Christian Nationalism or Bust. That's for you because I haven't published my book. So,
yeah,
And,
thank you, Yerder.
I mean,
$2, all right.
a lot of the criticism on Christian nationalism kind of shifted away from you and towards more of the, I guess, the charismatic side. Like, and I name Michael Flynn and Sean Foyt as the two examples as the poster children of like charismatic Christian nationalism. Do you have any thoughts on this segment or this brand of Christian nationalism? And I guess whether
Yeah,
it's
you know,
even...
I don't follow. I probably should, but I just don't follow a lot of that stuff. I know that I hear. I've seen and read some things on kind of those guys, and one of the things I tried to make kind of clear up front. I think I made clear in the introduction was basically I'm not affirming what people have said or have not said. I've not said that Christian nationalism is. And I tried to build my own kind of theory of what it is. So I didn't say what are people saying about it, and then I went off to give the case for what people are saying about what saying Christian nationalism is. But yeah, I mean the problem with a lot of those guys is they have this like sacralized view of the United States as a sort of chosen nation over against other nations, and I don't agree with that. So I think you can have a Christian nation, of course, and I do think that you can have a uniquely blessed nation in history and through the course of providence. But yeah, those guys, I'm not obviously on their side, but I don't like counter signal them either. Like the thing with like evangelicals, just broadly speaking, is I consider them just generally as allies. And if I knew them, like if I talked to them in person, I would say I disagree with this, and here's why. You don't have to believe this to be a Christian nationalist and want America to be a Christian nation, all that. So I don't like counter signal them for that reason. But
yeah, it's just interesting that you're one of the thought leaders on Christian nationalism, but they try to paint Marjorie Taylor Greene's the thought leader, or Michael Flynn, who I don't even know how much
He's
relevance.
I don't even think he's a preacher, so which is why I've never even bothered to write about him.
I mean,
because
Sean Foyt, I like the fact that he's a man of action, but he's pretty weird otherwise and tied with the Bethel crowd. And they try to say, hey, Christian nationalism is teaching the seven mountains thing. And it's like, well, even the seven mountains is, a flawed theory or flawed analytical tool, if you want to use that type of language. But it's like, it's not unbiblical to say that Christians should know what they're good at and then do and master what they're good at. If you're good at being, if you're into politics, go into politics and be a Christian in politics. If you're in business, be a Christian in business. Like, if you're an entertainment, be an entertainer, Christian entertainer, and all that other stuff. That stuff's not bad. I mean, I think they have like an eschatological bend to it, but I don't think that part's necessarily bad, and that's kind of what Christian nationalism's similar to. But
well, I mean, the regime wants to have this term that sounds scary, so they have Christian nationalism, and because basically Yeah, there's just a lot of neurosis in society. There's people neurotic and fearful, and they want to be in constant state of fear. That's what the media does and social media. And so you have this term Christian nationalism, and they use it as like a statistical category, like a sociological category to really capture as many essentially white evangelicals as they possibly can. And so then they ascribe to that demographic, that voting block, essentially a term that's scary. And then they use that to beat them down and just beat them down. And that's what the term really. So they don't want to like address me so much because I don't fit like within their boxes perfectly.
Yeah,
Like
you're not a
I don't say
post-mill,
like the Constitution is inspired. I'm not like a
right?
dominionist. I'm not post and all that. Um, they want to use the term, and they try to have this like the regime academics like a Samuel Perry and an Andrew Whitehead, these guys who study in Gorski study Christian nationalism, when really they're just regime academics who are kind of giving this kind of credentialed perspective, which is on a credentialed like certifying that this is a true objective thing, and that they use it just to beat down their political opponents.
I mean, like
And
Mark
really, I
Barber's
mean,
going to be
who's the
doing
lone
next month.
bulwark? Like, who's the lone bulwark? It's going to be
White
the
evangelicals.
evangelical. And so, what do? You destroy the bulwark, and then you unleash
And
the
then
horde
the
against the.
flanks, you take out the bulwark and there's nothing to protect the flanks. There's no center and you're just overwhelmed. And that's
Yeah,
what people didn't get when you said that. Is like they don't understand like, bulwark as a military term. Like there's still people on the flanks, there's still people in reserve, there's still other things in the battle line other than the bulwark. But if you take
yeah.
out that bulwark, that it won't hold. So that's what people didn't get. And I kind of wonder is like, should white people embrace identity politics more? Because it gets me thinking is like if white people discover block voting, it's kind of over for the Democrats, at least in many parts of the
If
country.
well, I mean, there, yeah. Uh,
But I'm not sure I like the path to get there because it, requires basically sowing seeds of a race, like some sort of race war. But even still, like Fox News, I think memory hold an interview recently where the guy talked about how critical race theory was anti-white, and they memory hold that. They just deleted it from all their socials afterwards, and it's
hmm.
like, that, that was one of the best arguments against critical race theory is that it was anti-white. That was the best argument you could use to wake up probably the most amount of people. And it was like the most discouraged argument that the regime did not want us using, or even like a lot of regime evangelicals did not want that argument being used.
Yeah, I do think that. Yeah. I guess there's a difference between like white identitarianism or identitarianism, however you say it, and also recognizing that there's anti-white kind of even built into a lot of policy and even constitutional interpretation. So when they talk about kind of racially diversifying any kind of institution or a corporation or hiring, they're set and on a pot like they talk about the positive side, which is we're going to hire African Americans and Hispanics and that. But what does that mean in the kind of like who's not getting hired? Like
No, it's the
who's
Matt.
the man?
It's the
Like who's
Matt
the man?
Chandler.
Yeah, like who's the well, yeah, who's absent from that process? Well, probably a higher qualified. It would be a higher qualified, typically a higher qualified white person.
The Anglo 8.
So yeah, so there is like built into like the way we understand civil rights laws, um, an anti-white that's essentially what it is, or it's like it's exclusion of whites by preferencing non-whites. And that's just what it has become. Like that's just a fact, and that's what these corporations have done. But I mean, there's a lot of lawsuits. I mean, people have like the America First legal defense or whatever it's called. Like they're suing on the basis of civil rights law, saying, look, like you are discriminating on the basis of race. These people are, as Chandler would say, you have an Anglo 8 and an Afro American 7. You chose a 7 over the 8 solely on the basis of race. and that's actually discrimination towards the person who is the 8. And so I do think there is something that we have to talk about that more. That's different than saying let's identify like white identitarianism, and I think that's faulty. I think it's faulty according to to reality. I think because I don't think I can identify with Norwegians or Swedes or you know, Hungarians. Like there's a certain
it's too pan-ethnic.
yeah, like if we say that our principle for nationalism is white nationalism, well, that means that it's me and then Hungarians and then like maybe Italians or French, and we're all somehow that can be the principle of our civil polity. That just doesn't make any sense. So that's why, like, even in the book, I don't talk about race. I do say, yeah, nation is built on particulars, history, ancestry matters. But it's not according to this like strict racial principle. Otherwise, you have a ridiculous. You can say that like your nation, like I said, can be a like pluck different people from different European nations, put them together, and say, oh no, it'll work because we're all white. That's not doesn't make sense to me. So, but yeah, I do agree. Like the anti-white bias within policy, constitutional interpretation, that's absolutely reality.
I mean, it might not. Pointing that out might not lead to white identitarianism, but it probably would wake a lot of white people up, and that would be good. But I don't like the idea of white people adopting block voting. Is like, if you get that type of mentality, it might eliminate the Democrats, but it might not also accomplish anything. And it's, I mean, our rules of engagement are don't sin. I feel like you might be if you want to go down that path, you would probably have to sin to get there. So I think that's our rules of engagement, but pretty basic. Anthony, if you have any more questions,
okay. I only have those 4.
Last call for the audience. I'm just going to say, hey, if you like Evangelical Dark Web, support us over at evangelicaldarkweb.org/join. That's our Patreon-like system because we built our own because Patreon censors. And we wanted to avoid that as much as possible. So that's where you can go. Otherwise, the least you can do is like this video, subscribe to the channel or podcast if you are new. New subs really help with the growth of a channel. So we'd appreciate that. Social medias, Evangelical Dark Web. We have a newsletter that's free. Otherwise, I didn't see any more questions come in. Steven, where can we find you? Plug your stuff.
I guess just Twitter. I got that goofy name, Perfinjust. PERFINJUST.
I will get that in the description.
Yeah, that's about it.
As soon as I can.
My wife hates that handle. She says I need to change it every time she sees it. She gets mad at me. But I'm not going to change it. But anyway, it's late.
Yeah, you'll be locked.
Some guy in the chat said I'm sleepy, and it's true. It's true. I had that bad dream. Last night. I woke up at 4 and I said, I'm not going to sit here and lay here. I'm going to get up. So I read like the morning
4
paper.
o'clock is closer to when I go to bed than it is to when I wake up.
Yeah. Well, and I got back late because I was at a church thing. So sleepy. But anyway, yeah, it was great to be on.
All right. Well, you take care. Thank you for coming on. Have a blessed night, everybody. And we will catch you on the next one, whenever that